Hi there, everybody. Pastor Travis here, and we are continuing our Bible stories. And this past Sunday, I told you the story of Jacob and Esau, and how Jacob made his brother really, really mad by stealing his birthright and his blessing. And but it was all a part of God's will. Esau was a scoundrel, a little bit of a scoundrel who was not going to take care of his legacy of being the leader of God's people. And God, from before they were born, had decided that Jacob would be the one that would be the leader of God's people. But whenever you pretend to be your brother Esau and trick your elderly father into blessing you instead of blessing Esau, there's always going to be some hard feelings that come through that. God's hand was in it, God's blessing was upon it, but it caused hard feelings. Our story is from Genesis 27 through chapter 33. And in the beginning, Jacob needs a place to go because his brother Esau is going to wait for their father to die so he doesn't hurt his father's feelings and then kill his brother. Because once Isaac is out of the way, their father, Esau and Jacob can kind of make their own rules, kind of an honor thing. Well, it had been their mother's idea for Jacob to steal Esau's birthright, and she very cleverly goes to her husband Isaac and says, "Oh my goodness, if Jacob winds up marrying local Canaanite women like Esau did, Esau's wives drive me crazy. I don't know what I'll do. Please send him back to my father's house so he can marry a girl from back home." And Isaac said, "You know what, that sounds like a good idea. I really don't like Esau's wives either." And so he sent Jacob back off to that far, far away place up in Mesopotamia, away from where they were traveling and living in tents in Palestine, and sent him back. And actually, this turned out to be, interestingly enough, a good example to Esau. The Bible says that Esau didn't really understand just how much his parents couldn't stand his two Canaanite wives. And so he actually went to Ishmael, his uncle, his father's half-brother, and married one of his daughters. Now, I guess I should remind everybody that, no, we do not marry our first cousins today, okay? I'm not saying it's okay to marry your first cousin. We're just talking about what's in the Bible. The Bible does not necessarily say that it's okay to marry your first cousin. About 400 years after the stories we're talking about, more than that actually, God will give Moses the law on Mount Sinai, and there are several relatives you are forbidden from ever marrying or having any sexual relationships with. Of course, if you're not married to them, according to the law of Moses, you're not supposed to be having sexual relations with them anyways. But included is anyone that can be called your sister. That includes half-sisters. That includes, they really didn't have a whole lot of stepsisters back then. I can only imagine it would include that. Sometimes, as your father got older, he'd take a young wife. You get caught with her, you are in, not only is that adultery, but you are in violation of the Mosaic law, you know. And so, you know, your aunt, of course this is all from a male perspective, so no sisters, no stepmoms, no aunts. You know, those are not people you are supposed to see naked, is actually the language that the Bible uses. And it does not prohibit first cousins. Today we prohibit first cousins largely because, is my understanding, not being a geneticist, but there's always the chance that you're too closely related, and there will be the possibility of genetic deformities and things like that. And of course this has built up a whole stigma in our culture, and so just because it happens in the Bible does not mean it's a good idea. But on the positive side of things, the reason they are going back to their mother's house of origin, family of origin, to find their wives is because they want to marry someone who has the same beliefs, values, virtues, understanding of God that they do. Okay? And that is something we should learn from. Okay? we don't want to necessarily keep it in the family so much that we marry our own first cousins. That's totally unnecessary and not a good thing in our culture. But we want to marry within our tribe, and that means the people of God. Unfortunately, people have used that to justify a form of racism. We are not talking about someone from your own ethnicity. When it comes to the people of God, there are two tribes in the world. There is the tribe of Adam, those who follow him in his sin, and God has made a new tribe. We are spiritual descendants of Abraham. Jesus is our head, like Adam used to be our head. We are the people of God. So don't go attaching yourself to people who are not of the people of God. And so Jacob, just like his father, winds up with a wife who is from his own tribe. So they will have these things in common, and he won't marry pagan women like his brother did and drive his parents nuts. And so they send him away, not only to find a wife, but to keep him safe from his homicidal brother, who is just still steaming mad about everything that Jacob did to him in his last story. But he doesn't have much to take with him. He kind of flees, like, oh, I have permission to go, bye, and he's gone. And as he camps on the way, he stops for the night to camp on the way. He camps in a place that will later become known as Bethel, House of God. And the reason it gets named Bethel, House of God, is because Jacob, who is eventually going to father the entire nation of Israel, all the tribes are going to be named after his son. They're going to be descended after his sons. He has nothing. He's got a rock that he finds to lay his head on, and that's all he's got for a pillow. And he dreams a dream. In his dream, and it seems to be more than just a dream. It seems to be a vision. In that place, he sees a ladder that goes all the way up to heaven, and angels going up and down on the ladder. And he wakes up from the dream, and he goes, I did no idea that this is one of the holy places of the world. It doesn't look like it, but it must be. And so he sets up that rock that he laid his head on as a monument, and it becomes known as the House of God, named by Jacob. Jacob, even though he has received the birthright and the blessing, and he is the grandson of Abraham, Jacob, it seems like the Bible thinks it's very important to tell us that Jacob has his own conversion experience with God. He's not just running off of the idea that, well, I'm from this family, so I'm part of the people of God. He sees this vision, he responds to it, and he talks to God and he says, God, if you see me through, I'm going to trust in you, and if you see me through and you see me back safely to my father's house, and that's not going to happen for about 20 years, but if you see me safely back to my father's house, you will be my God. And no, we don't necessarily like the idea of making deals with God, but for him, it's kind of a sprout of faith, that first germination of faith, like, okay, my grandfather was able to trust in God. My father was able to trust in God. I've never really thought about it before, but you know what? I need him now. I'm going to trust in God. He wouldn't bring my family this far just to abandon me. So he trusts in the Lord. He makes his way to his uncle's house in Paddan Aram, up in Mesopotamia, where his mother had come from, where Isaac's father Abraham had originally from that area kind of come from, to the relatives, and he meets his uncle. His uncle takes him in, and he's working on the farm there for his uncle, and his uncle says, now, you can't work for me for free. I got to pay you something. What is it that I have that you want? And oh boy, do we want something. This is one of the few, if not the only times in the Bible, except for maybe Song of Solomon, where love at first sight is portrayed in a decently good light. Normally, when in the Bible and in real life, when you see that person and you must have them, normally that's a bad thing because you're already married. And we see that in other stories of the Bible, and you desire that which you do not have. But Jacob's single, Rachel's single, and when he sees her, it's like from a movie. Time stands still, and he tells Laban, I want to marry your daughter, Rachel. And so they agree on 7 years of labor to marry Rachel. And the Bible says that the years seemed like days because he loved Rachel so much. And the time came, and they had the wedding, and weddings were a huge deal back then. They gathered everybody together. Probably a lot of alcohol was involved, so at some point they have the ceremony type part of it that we would recognize being very similar probably to our ceremony. They bring the two together. Now, she's veiled, and not the kind of see-through veils brides wear today. She is veiled up like some of the women in the more oppressive countries of the Middle East do today, and you can't see her. And they perform the little ceremony, and off they go to their tent to do what married people do, and they wake up the next morning, and Jacob realizes that he is lying next to Rachel's older sister, who is not nearly as attractive, and whom he didn't want to marry in the first place, Leah. And he goes to his uncle Laban. Now, Jacob's name means leg puller, and that means exactly in their culture what it means in our culture. He's a trickster. He's always pulling your leg. He seems to get that from his uncle Laban. They have kind of met their match. So this is the first time that Laban scams Jacob. It won't be the last, unfortunately. And Jacob says, "What did you do? What did you do?" And Laban makes excuses. "Oh, you're not from here. I guess you didn't realize that we always have to marry off the older daughter first. You know, what were you expecting?" And so they work out a deal. Jacob wants the same deal for the woman he actually wanted to marry. He's going to marry Rachel. He's going to work 7 years for him to pay the bride price. But this time, we're going to have the wedding first, and then I'll work the 7 years for you. And so that's what they work out. You got to feel for Leah through all this, all right? She's obviously not the favorite. And since her wedding with him came at the end of the 7 years, and he bargains to go ahead and marry Rachel before the next 7 years of labor, it must have been right after. So this is a raw deal for Leah, obviously. Poor Jacob, he wound up in this. Everybody's a victim here. We feel sorry for Leah. Jacob, this is not really necessarily his fault. The only good thing he could have done is said, well, I guess I'm stuck with Leah and not Rachel, and made the best of it. That's what we would encourage you to do as Christians, is love people who you may not want to love. That's what Jesus did with us as his enemies. He loved us so much that he died for us, even when we were not very lovable. But, so he's a bit of a victim here. He didn't want to marry Leah. He only wanted to ever marry Rachel. And then an interesting thing happens. Rachel doesn't seem to be able to have kids, especially back in these times. That's why you join together in a union, is to produce offspring. Definitely in their culture. Some people in our culture would agree with that. Leah starts having kids left and right. She has 4 sons, seems like right off the bat. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Now, I'm not going to get these names all right, but and so she is, when he wants to hang out with his sons, and men love daughters, but men definitely love sons, and especially in this kind of culture. So he's going to her tent all the time, and she goes from being the not the favorite to the one that's getting all kinds of attention. And so Leah is jealous. Leah does something that their society thought was acceptable. Once again, not acceptable for Christians. She has a handmaiden that she offers up and says, well, if I can't have my own children, I'm going to have children through my handmaid. And just like his grandfather Abraham, Jacob goes along with it, and he produces 2 sons through Rachel's handmaiden. Leah says 2 people can play at that game, and so she offers up her handmaiden, and Jacob winds up having 2 sons by her, and finally Leah has 2 more sons and a daughter, and finally the Lord opens Rachel's womb, and she has Joseph, who is going to be a big deal through the rest of the story, and Benjamin. And on top of that, not only is she his favorite wife, and these are the only 2 sons he gets from the only woman he ever wanted to marry in the first place, but eventually, when she does have Benjamin, it's a hard birth, and she dies from complications. Anyways, back to the story. Several of these children have been born. The 7 years is up, and he sits down with his father-in-law. The relationship has become strained, okay? Jacob seems to have overstayed his welcome. Also, they are father and son-in-law, and, also, he gave him the wrong daughter to begin with, and everything is just, things like that can wear on a relationship. So Laban and Joseph are not having the best relationship. Joseph is still working for Laban, taking care of his flocks and herds, and Laban is enjoying the fact that Laban is flourishing through his livestock because of having Jacob work for him. But the relationship is very strained, and Jacob starts to say, it's time to start making an exit plan to get back to my father's house, or at least get out of here, because Laban is not happy with me. And so he approaches his father-in-law and says, I've been here too long. It's time for me to strike out on my own, but I have nothing to go with me. I've just been working for you. So I'd like to make a deal with you. You keep all the sheep that are pure color, and I'll take the ones with the spots and the stripes and the less desirables. And Laban said, well, can't argue with that. Now, Jacob takes reeds, and he cuts stripes and spots into the reeds, and he puts them by the watering hole where they water the sheep. And probably it isn't science that helps him out, it's probably God that helps him out, but it has the desired effect. When the sheep water at the watering hole, and they're mating at the watering hole, and they're seeing these spots and stripes, they start having more and more offspring that are striped and spotted, and not the solid color that was desirable at the time. One day, Laban looks at his flocks and notices that, whoa, Jacob said he would take the ones I didn't want off my hands, but it's getting to where so many of them are striped and spotted. He is robbing me blind. And so they meet and they rework the deal. And Laban says, I'll take the striped and spotted ones, and you take the solid colored ones, and that'll work out better, And so Jacob goes and he pulls those disfigured reeds from the watering hole, and they go back to having mostly solid color offspring again, and it's a big mess. It does not help the relationship any. And finally one night, Jacob says to his 2 wives and the 2 other women that he's having children by and everything, and it's time to go. Your dad doesn't like me. And they load up in the night. Unbeknownst to Jacob, his favorite wife, Rachel, steals her father's household gods. Okay? We get the impression that Laban and the other kind of side relatives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, maybe they all know the one true God, but maybe they don't worship him exclusively. Maybe they've just got him as a part of their pantheon. But she steals the idols that her father has, probably thinking that she wants the blessings for her family from those gods, small g gods, and so, and she doesn't want him to have it because he's made a mess of things, her father, and so she steals them. They leave in the night. They disappear. Of course, if you're going to notice 10 to 12 grandkids and 4 women and your manager of all that you have and all the sheep, whatever sheep it was that Jacob was able to claim as his, they're gone the next day. Laban has to hunt them down and find them as they are traveling, making their way back to Palestine. And he finds them, and he comes up to Jacob, and he says, "You left without saying goodbye. You left without letting me kiss my grandkids, and you stole my household gods. What's the deal?" And Jacob starts to explain that, well, you weren't too friendly towards me. Things were going south, and I thought we had to get out of here. As far as your household gods, though, whoever you find that has them, they will die, because that was done without me. He didn't know Rachel had done it. Laban searches the camp, doesn't find it. Rachel does a funny thing. She takes her saddle and sets him over the bag of gods and sits on it. And when they say, "We're here to check the tent," she goes, "This is how old this excuse is. I'm having woman problems." And they didn't say anything else to her, and they left her alone. So Jacob's like, "Well, you're accusing me of nothing. Apparently you can't even find them. They're not here." They make a pact. They make a covenant. They set up a bunch of rocks as a monument, and Jacob will not come past the rocks to bother Laban. Laban will not go past these rocks to bother Jacob. They have a big meal together to consecrate it, this solemn promise. Laban kisses his grandkids goodbye, and he goes on his way. Unfortunately, that is not the only decent end to the story. They come to the land where Esau dwells, and they see him coming with 400 men. And of course, you made your brother super mad 20 years ago, and now you've got a bunch of sheep and a bunch of wives and a bunch of kids in your caravan, and you're about to encounter on the road your brother with 400 men. So Jacob starts arranging the caravan in a way that they can maybe all get away. Every kid goes with their own mom, and the servant women and their kids are in the front. They've got to deal with Esau first. Leah's after them, and then Rachel, the favorite wife, is in the back. But Jacob himself, I always thought he sent them all on ahead of him, but of course you have to read and review these stories, especially if you're going to tell them. He runs ahead to his brother, lays down on the ground, has part of the caravan present some of his wealth as a gift to his brother, and his brother jumps down off of his animal and hugs Jacob. Esau runs up and hugs Jacob. So we read a passage from Romans last Sunday about Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated, and they're going to be enemies forever. Well, that was mostly about the two nations that come from them. The nation of Israel, the nation of Edom. They're going to be enemies forever. But the two brothers actually kind of sort of made up here, although there's a little bit of passive-aggressive stuff going on. And Esau says, what's with all the treasure on the camels here? And Jacob says, "Oh, it's a gift for you, my brother." And Esau goes, I have my own stuff. Keep your gift, And Jacob persuades him to take it, And this is probably one of those deals where Esau's happy to take it, but he's not supposed to take it immediately. He's supposed to argue with his brother to satisfy honor. So he kind of, gives a big "I'm sorry" gift to Esau. And Esau promises, "Hey, we'll escort you guys through this territory. My 400 men will go in front, and you guys just follow us." And even though he had just given him a peace offering, Jacob's like, we're not traveling that fast, and we would hate to slow you down. You catch my drift? Esau might be planning to take advantage of them if they all travel together. So Jacob makes his excuses about why they can't travel together. The sheep don't go that fast. The kids don't move that fast. You go and blaze a trail in front of us, and we'll come along at our own pace. Eventually, Jacob makes it back to Palestine, where they continue to live in tents like his forefathers before him. And eventually they move to Egypt, but that is this Sunday's story as we talk about Joseph. The Lord took care of Jacob through all of that. Jacob didn't always make the best decisions, but the Lord saw Jacob through those difficulties, and he's ready and waiting to see you through your difficulties too. And it isn't important how good you are, it's important whose child you are. And we want you to become a child of God. And so, if you feel like you're not, you need to talk to God. You need to ask Him for the forgiveness of your sins through the blood that Jesus shed on the cross, and become a child of God. God has made it possible for you to become a child of God. Abraham wasn't born a child of God. God made him a child of God. And the same with Isaac and Jacob. Even though they were descendants of Abraham, Jacob had to have his own conversion experience, and you need to have your own conversion experience too. And the stuff of life gets in the way. Our relatives make us angry, and our other people that we are in business with defraud us, and people abandon us and betray us. But God is willing to see you through it all. And I hope you will trust Him today. Remember, read your Bibles and trust in the Lord.